Hello, Harbor. Hope you're all doing well today. Grace and peace to you. I am speaking to you today from one of my favorite places in all of New Hanover County. This is Carolina Beach State Park. I literally, before I sat down, there was a deer that ran across here. He made a noise I'd never heard a deer make before, and it terrified me. It caught me off guard. But I'm here today because this is one of the places that I often go to think, to process life, to process the world. But I'm primarily here because the first time I came here, it was recommended to me that I go hiking here. It was my first week living in Wilmington. And I get really energized running in new places. And I was so energized. I was going for a jog around here and I was so energized. I jogged around here for an hour and a half, loved every bit of it. And then when I started to get dehydrated and a little overheated, I said, it's time to go. But then I realized I didn't know where I was. I didn't remember which trail I had come off of, and I started wandering around. I started running, actually, trying to find the trail, and the more I ran, the more exhausted I got, and I was texting my wife. I said, I don't know where I am. I'm lost, and I just started picturing headlines of, helicopters coming in, an idiot pastor is found at a small park, and when I finally got back, I was sunburned, I was exhausted, overheated, and I'll never forget that first time that I came here, getting lost in these trails. I tell you that story, not because I want to embarrass myself, but because in today's scripture, Moses gets lost. Moses, he's living in Midian, and he's sort of settled down, he's got a home, so to speak, but Moses never had a home. Even when he was living in Egypt, he had a home, but he wasn't living with his people, and then he had to leave all of a sudden. And then even the home that he found and settled down in wasn't really a home. He was still a foreigner. He was still a kind of refugee. Many of us often get lost sometimes. We go through seasons of feeling lost, and sometimes we wonder if we're ever going to get out. There are wonderful parents who are doing everything they can for their children, but who feel kind of lost sometimes. There are teenagers in high school who are trying to do everything they can to fit in, and they're feeling lost. There are people who are newly retired who have a great pension plan. They saved their whole life for this moment. But then when they retire, they feel lost because there's not as much purpose anymore. There are people who have everything you could want, every advantage you could want in life, who are totally lost. And as we have learned recently, you can be the strongest, most powerful nation in the world and be lost. So Moses was lost. He didn't really know it, but he was. And he was out in the wilderness one day. And he saw this glow in the distance, and the scripture said that he was just compelled to see what that was. And so he climbs up the mountain, he sees what it was, and then of course we know it's God, right? He has a divine encounter, and that encounter says, you need to take off your shoes. We hear that in scripture as being a sign of reverence, that this is holy ground, this is holy dirt. But I read a survey recently that said that 81% of the people say they take off their shoes at home because they want to keep their floor clean, and they want to relax. They want to just let go. They want to let loose. And hearing that in our context of Moses being told to take off his shoes and never having a home, I think, well, now he's home. Now he can relax. Now he can be with God without any pretense. He can be vulnerable and open with God. God wanted him here, not to talk to Isaac or Jacob or Abraham. He said, I want you, Moses. I want to talk to you. And Moses says, who am I? Who am I that you would want to talk to? Who am I that you would want to give an assignment to? Who am I? There's a rabbi who once said that when he gets to the next life, they're going to likely ask him not, did he live like Moses, but did he live like himself? Which is to say that God's going to do big things through you. God created you for a specific purpose. God has a plan for you. Don't try to be like someone else. Be the person that God is calling you to be. Now, before Moses reached that point, before he saw that burning bush was actually an answered prayer. Not just one prayer, but millions of prayers of God's people. The prayers, they said, were not even really prayers anymore. They were just wordless groans. You ever had a prayer so intense that you couldn't even find the words to express how you felt? You just groaned. I've been there too. But one thing I can say about this mess that we're in as a country right now is that Whether it's COVID, whether it's racial reconciliation and all of the protests and all of the heat back and forth, I know many of us are saying prayers. I think a lot of us are collectively saying a lot of wordless groans. But this story from Scripture shows us that somewhere, God is building a fire. God hears our groans. God hears our prayers without words. And somewhere, God is building a fire in the distance. There is a bush burning somewhere. And I'm not talking about a riot. God is going to take those riots and those fires that were set, and he's going to redeem them. And he's going to take that fire and let it burn in someone else. And usually it comes from unlikely people. Not the people who are in the headlines, not the people who are trending in Twitter. You know, we often forget that Moses was a refugee. You know, here in America, we have a history of being kind of stingy with who we let in our country. And, you know, you can build a case for good reasons. They might be a terrorist. They might not add any value to our country. They might have nefarious reasons. And I understand that logic, but you can't justify that theologically. Moses was not only a refugee, but he was also a murdering refugee. He didn't have a cent in his pocket. He likely had a speech impediment. He had no value to Midian, no discernible skills. But he wouldn't even make it into America. He wouldn't even be allowed, much less he would probably be in prison. And yet, that was the one who God chose to give the burning bush to. That was the one that God chose to send on the greatest mission, the greatest rescue effort ever. What does that tell you about how God moves in this world? Here's what I can guarantee you. I don't know a lot. I know a lot has to change in the future, but here's what I know. Out there somewhere, God is starting a fire. God is starting a fire in someone, and it's going to be probably someone you least expect. It's going to be that teenager sitting at home watching everything on TV and wondering, I can do something. What can I do? They're going to do great things one day because of what's happening now. It's going to be one of our leaders right now who never had a voice before, but who's finding it now. God's building a fire in them. And maybe you who have been lost, maybe you have been in a rut and you all of a sudden are feeling a spark. You're feeling God's movement inside of you. Maybe God is building a fire in you. Maybe you're the hope for the world that we need. That's what I know. That God out there right now is building a fire for this world. Thanks be to God.